Hello, everyone. Um, do you guys see the buyer broker agreement up there?
Yes.
Yes,
All
ma'am.
right. Since nobody's here in the room, let's go over it. Let's start. So the first thing I wanted to touch on, real fast, and I made all these copies and no one is here. Good evening, and thank you for joining me. So, we're going to talk about that, but can you see the listing agreement? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
So the new listing agreement, the only compensation
Mute it.
listed is
All right.
now for
It's another
for the
digger.
listing agent. Hey, Miss Kathy. Okay, so see here on C1, if you take a listing, the only thing you can negotiate now is your own personal compensation.
Right.
Okay. So there is a spot. No, there isn't. There's nothing on here about the compensation that is to go to a buyer. So I did want to point that out. So no more will it be listed on that. The buyer's compensation will be negotiated as a part of the purchase. So the purchase agreement here, you will need to attach, first of all, on the listing agreement, you have to attach the compensation. This one. This also goes with the listing agreement. So the broker compensation advisory, which is in this packet here, Ms. Kathy, here, Ed, and so. All right, so let me back up now. So what I want to do, what my plan is for this evening is just to kind of go over these agreements with everyone, to touch on some of the changes, but also get you guys to understand fully to read the contracts. Your clients are trusting you that you know what you're giving them. And so for you to be able to go through these contracts and to be able to explain them if there's any questions from your clients, okay? So this broker compensation advisory now will go with your listing agreement as well. So it has to go to the seller as well as to the buyer. On this, it explains to your seller that a buyer can come in without a buyer's agent and they can still do the deal. So on the listing agreement, there's a place where you can put, sorry, give me 1 second. I closed out my folder. Let me get back to that. There's a location, it's C1. That's the compensation to the seller's broker. And then on C2, it says additional compensation to the seller's broker if the buyer is unrepresented. Okay? Because at that point, if the buyer comes in and they don't have somebody, kind of like what we used to call dual agency, right? You would get both sides. You would get the full commission. Now you have to negotiate that ahead of time. So it could still be the 2.5. Okay. So if you end up representing both the seller and the buyer, it's now in two different parts, but that's only agent. That has nothing to do with the buyer's agent.
Leslie, you're cutting out a lot. Sorry.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. That's I'm wondering if it's because of our Wi-Fi here. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. So just to
Yes.
see the parts that cut out, you're saying that in the first box, I can't see it. I think you said C1. We talk
Yes,
about
C1.
if we're the listing agent, what our commission would be. And
Mhm.
C2, if we have to represent the buyer because there is no buyer agent, that's where we negotiate what we would get paid at that point.
Exactly. Exactly.
We're negotiating with the seller.
But negotiating with the seller, yes.
So the
Right.
seller can very well say, no, you're only getting 2.5%.
Yes, they can, but then you explain to them what you're going to have to do for that buyer.
Right.
I mean, writing the contracts and doing all of that, doing the inspections and working with them and everything. So it's just, it has everything to do with us being sellers, right? We're salesmen. We're realtors that are salesmen. And so it's selling your services. So, okay. All right. So that's the RLA. Now I am not going to go into details and go deep into that because that wasn't the reason for this Zoom. This Zoom is to go over the buyer broker agreement. One of the things, so this is the buyer compensation advisory. So the main things that I wanted to point out is that this first portion section 1, it has everything to do with only the seller. It's behind the open house one. Yeah. You're welcome. So this buyer compensation agreement basically lets the seller know that this is how the compensation is to be negotiated. The compensation for the, it talks about, it explains now that everything is fully negotiated or negotiable, right? We already knew that. We already knew that compensation was negotiable, but it now has to be in writing. It has to be put down for them to be able to read it and go back to it. So that's the A of part 1. B is that what I was just talking about on the listing agreement, where it talks about the unrepresented buyer. Okay. And then C talks about dual agency. So if you bring in a buyer, that's a completely different set of rules. So if you bring a buyer in, now you have to negotiate compensation for the buyer, for you at that point. Okay. So there's going to be, no matter what it is, you can't go back and say, well, they were unrepresented, because that's not really being truthful, correct? You now have to negotiate for that compensation for the buyer. And that's where you would do the buyer's representation. So that's section 1. That is specifically and strictly only for the seller. So that's this portion here. You guys do see that on my screen, right? Okay. So now we get to the buyer portion. This is where the negotiation begins. And this is what I suggest as real estate agents. When you're meeting with a buyer, we are no longer going to the open house to meet them. Okay. Or not the open house, but we're no longer going to the house they want to see. We now set an appointment prior to that to sit down and do your buyer's representation, your buyer's presentation. Okay. And if you don't have one, which I'm assuming everybody on this call has one, you have a buyer's presentation. You now put this compensation advisory as well as the buyer broker agreement into your presentation. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. So just know that so that you will be able to have that conversation with your buyer at the beginning before anything happens. Now, that's the explaining the portion to the buyers. Okay. So explaining to the buyers that your compensation is negotiable, that they are ultimately responsible for it, but it will be part of the purchase agreement that you will try and you will negotiate that with the sellers on their behalf for them to pay that portion. Now, whatever you guys decide, the compensation percentage to be, that is between you and your buyer. Okay. And that's what this part 3 is. So on part 3 of this agreement is where you discuss the compensation, how much you're expecting to get paid for your part of doing the deal. And then also somebody's knocking on the door, I think.
I couldn't get it. Is it the app not working?
It is, but I think something's wrong with our door. Oh. And I'm wondering if something's wrong with the Wi-Fi. Are you guys hearing me?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So this part here, 3A, all right? So 3A is talking about the compensation, but then, sorry, here, seller pays the compensation. This is where you're going to kind of have that heart-to-heart conversation with your clients, letting them know that you're going to negotiate on their behalf. Okay. So part 1 talks about the compensation, and then you put it in the offer. And then part 2 is if the seller does not go to,
Sorry, you're cutting off.
if say you work on, sorry, if you're working on a FSBO. Okay. So part 2 is for FSBO. So if you have a buyer that's for sale by owner, then you negotiate directly with the seller. Okay. One is having the conversation with the seller's agent and direct and blah, blah, blah. Sorry. I'm rushing through this, guys. Sorry. Okay. So then on C, it explains that how this change came about and what it used to look like. So because you're going to get those questions, why are we doing this now? I looked for a house last year and I didn't have to do any of this. Right. So now it gives you that information to where you can explain it to, this is the reason why. Okay. And it also lists in here under 2B, talks about the class action lawsuit. So it explains to your clients as well in that this is the reason why we're making those changes. Okay. That's on this one, Kathy, the buyer broker compensation.
Okay, I'm on that one, but 2B.
So it's on 2B of the you're on the buyer broker agreement. So 2 pages before that one. Yeah. So this really dig in and read this so that you know it and you're able to explain it. I wrote some little chicken scratch notes on here, but I was rushing so much I don't remember what my notes were for. Sorry. I apologize. But this is one of those things that if you read this, it has every single answer that you will need in order to explain things to your clients. That's really what this is for. Okay. So going to the buyer broker agreement itself. If you guys see all this red, that's all what's been changed since the last time we had this conversation. So we're going to go through it pretty much line by line, and I want you, Kyle, who is our experienced agent over here. Oh, connection.
You're breaking up again.
I think her screen got frozen.
Yeah.
It's unstable. All right, you guys, are you guys there? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
My
we can
Wi-Fi is
hear you
unstable.
now.
Can you hear me?
we can hear you.
No?
Yes.
Now we can.
Okay, good. So the buyers, so that means that you, another agent, can deal with the same buyer. You have to make sure
Gone again.
that
You may have
God,
to reteach
really
this
bad.
again.
Yeah, we will. We'll go over it again. I think we're going to probably do this a few times. We are recording it to the cloud, so I'm hoping it goes through. And Brian is also recording it for YouTube. So, but on the YouTube, they're not going to have the contracts.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it will be on.
But you will have on. Okay. So I'm just hoping that the Wi-Fi here in Manteca, for some reason, I've asked them to update it and it's still wonky. All right. So going through this broker's compensation agreement. So make sure that you put the period of when you're going to be working with the clients, right? That's self-explanatory.
Can't be over 3 months.
It can't, okay. But there is a modification. I did include it in the packet if you need to, so you can extend it. Okay. But it has to be done on the modification. And there is a form for that. Did you guys get that?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is the period again? Is it
It's only
30 or
3
90
months.
days? 3
It's
months.
only 90 days.
No more than 90 days.
Yeah, no more than 90 days. And then you would need to do a modification. So if you can't find a home in that long, you need to make sure that you're updating that. So it's going to make you got to make sure you're keeping track of stuff. Okay. All right. So then down here is the property type. You're making sure that you're checking what it is, what counties, what cities, anything else you want to put in there as to what the buyer is looking for. Your compensation amount. So here is where you're going to have that conversation. Okay. Amount of compensation. 2.5% is what we are used to pretty much, right? You're not going to be able to ask. It's not on the MLS anymore. So you're never going to know what they're actually offering. It's all going to be negotiations, period. So I personally, if I was filling this out, I would do 2.5. Yes, Kathy.
So on the listing agreement,
Mhm.
we're not putting it on a listing agreement, what they've agreed to pay the other person. So we're not gonna know that they're not gonna know that ahead of time.
No.
So that's a little bit different. So this, but they're gonna probably be told to expect this to come in.
Yes. And I'm hoping, right? We're hoping that the listing agents are having these conversations, right? I mean, it's part of the advisory, and that advisory goes to the seller as well. Okay. So on that advisory, that is part of the listing agreement now, that has to be included as part of the listing agreement. So the buyer broker advisory explains to the seller, these are the ways that the compensation is going to be asked to be paid. Okay. So it lists it out clearly for them.
But there's,
Mhm.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
There's nothing in writing.
There's
So if
nothing.
you've ever had a seller tell you, I plan on replacing that kitchen floor, it's not going to cost me much. And you tell that to the buyer's agent. And it's never in writing, then you and the buyer's agent are probably gonna have to figure out how you're
to
gonna
get it.
split the cost of that kitchen floor. You know, and so it's the same way with this. If the seller tells you, yeah, I plan on offering 2.5%, but it's not in writing, it won't be in writing, right? And it comes down to negotiation, and they're like, I ain't paying them anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't represent that that's what they're paying. I don't think I would. I would tell the buyer's agent, put it in the contract what you expect to be paid.
Yep.
And then we can negotiate from there. If the seller says, I'm not paying anything, well, then it's a back and forth till you get to a point where everybody's happy.
Yep. Did you guys hear what Brian said?
Yes.
A little bit?
Ye-
Yeah?
ye-
Okay, good.
Yes,
All right.
I do have a question.
Yes, go
Um,
ahead.
So it won't be anywhere on the MLS and it won't be anywhere in the contract on the listing agreement, but we are using the advisory to let them know that to expect a negotiation at the
Yes.
representation of the offer.
Yes, that is correct. That
Okay.
is correct. And
Um,
this, go ahead.
And also, I've been following all these changes, but and I was looking at will this be in effect until August 12th,
17th. 17th.
17th?
On the
Yes.
MLS, it will be August the 12th where they'll start to remove the
The
compensation.
compensation.
N-
I
no,
suggest that if you have anything that you start using these contracts, they come out next week, you said?
The 24th.
The 24th. All these documents come out the 24th, so they will be on CAR. I would suggest you start using them now. That way you
Quick-
get used to them.
Yeah, quick
This is
question.
the
I
same,
know
but
time
Mhm.
is of the essence, but let's say I'm taking, so they're coming up on the 24th, the new documentation?
Yes, yes.
Because I'm taking a listing, so I just gotta make sure that I don't do one and then I have to redo it.
Yeah. So the way that you're seeing it now, where it has the word draft across the top of it,
Mhm.
that's the only way you can get these documents right now.
Okay,
They come out without the red and the draft on them, on the 24th.
okay,
Okay.
thanks.
If she was to take one now, she would still use the old form.
yeah,
Yeah.
you just got to, by the 17th, you've got to amend them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's another form they have.
Yeah, I wonder, I thought I saw it.
Yeah,
So,
I
so
think
yeah,
it's-
if you do take a listing, you can use the old form, but you'll have to do an amendment, I believe, and that's one of the new forms. There's like 30 updated forms right now.
Right.
Yeah. So, but if your client can wait a couple more days, you'll have it then. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so that your compensation, the amount of compensation is going to be going on to line. Sorry, I'm looking here. I'm doing it on the screen and I'm doing it here. It is E1. You can do a flat rate or you can do a percentage, and we're all used to the 2.5%. Okay. If there are any other payments received, it just goes into more detail in regards to that. The continued right to payment for broker involved properties. The continuation period shall be, I'm not sure what that actually means. I'll have to do a little bit more I'm not sure what that means. The continuation period shall be, I'm assuming 90 days, because that's what that's what this contract is. That's what I'm assuming, that it continues for 90 days. And then here, cancellation is effected after 30 days after receipt, because everybody's going to check that one box right here for exclusive. Okay. That box right there on A2 for exclusive. Okay. All right. We don't want to share. What are we in this business for? Just kidding. Yes, Miss Linda.
So, we're gonna check the box exclusive, but you're on the listing, right?
No, this is the buyer broker.
Okay, never mind. It's on the listing. Never mind.
You do want to make sure that you're using the correct form. So there is one that is an exclusive, right to sell. That's the form that you want to use. And that's the one that I showed.
I think
Um,
I'm going to interrupt you. I think that one that you just mentioned about the continuation, you know how the listing,
mhm.
like I'm assuming it's like if you're at the end of the 3-month period of the 90 days and you do enter into contract on that date that expires, you got a 30-day for continuation, or write the modification of terms or time.
Gotcha. Mhm.
That's what I think, because it reminds me of the listing agreement.
Gotcha. So here's the listing agreement, and make sure there is 3. There's 3 different ones. You want to make sure it's the exclusive authorization, right to sell. That gives you the exclusivity. Okay. If you
Right.
use the other one, it's anybody that can sell the property. Okay.
You're talking about 2A2?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm talking about on the listing agreement
Oh,
itself.
listing. No,
Yeah, the listing agreement itself, because there is multiple ones.
Gotcha.
Okay. The buyer broker compensation lists at the top that it is non-exclusive.
Yeah.
Unless that box is checked. So if you don't check that box, anybody else can come in. Okay.
It's just like checking our templates.
Yeah, you got to keep it. There's actually something here, right here. So this is automatically checked. So if you look on page 2, the broker compensation advisory is automatically checked on page 2 to make sure that you include it.
Oh, right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that your buyer has that information. So it is going to go to the seller, but then it also needs to go to both, to the buyer.
Right, the buyer.
Okay. Okay, so it just goes in now to basically just explain that every Everything is negotiable. They're not fixed by law. The brokers can't make it a fixed rate. It's always negotiable. Okay. I know that in our independent contractor agreement, it says that we don't like to do less than 5. But so we're going to have to adjust that as well. And that's probably another form that's going to come out is the independent contractor agreement, and everybody's going to have to sign that. I froze a little bit. Did you guys miss that?
No.
No,
Okay.
got it.
All right. So be ready
Independent
for
what?
the independent contractor agreement that you signed when you joined the office. We're probably going to have to adjust that, do an amendment or a new contract. Okay. Most of the time when they do changes to it, we try to send it out. The last one wasn't really not many, like just a link was changed in it. So we didn't send it out, but we'll probably have to do it this time. It goes into this second page pretty much just goes into explaining the timing, how it's paid, what's the negotiation and ways that you can do that. And then it also talks about the cancellations. So, any properties that may be excluded by the representation, that would be up in the top, 2B. So anything other than that, where we go, 2 and then B here. So if there's anything other here, it's a possibility you don't get paid. So you want to make sure that you're taking and you're paying attention to everything. Because if you check here that you're only doing single family homes, and then you help them sell a vacant land, but you don't have that box checked, they're not required to pay you. Okay. So you make sure that if they have you taking them to go look at something different, you make sure that you redo this whole thing. Okay. You got to do that because we live in California, and in California, everybody likes to fight everything. So just be mindful of everything that's on this document. And in all honesty, I really feel like that's one of the things that they're pushing for is for us to understand these documents 1000%.
Personally,
I think it's great.
working for the government.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely not a contract. I don't know. I'd rather not work for the government. All right. So going on to the page 3, making sure that you read all of this information, conflicts with any other brokers. So if another broker comes, you got to talk about that, making sure, because if they have a non-exclusive representation, but you have exclusive, you're the only one that's going to get paid. Okay.
You have to ask them.
Yeah. Yes. Make sure you're asking your clients if they have any agreements that they signed, anything else with anybody else. Okay. And if they have, you get a copy of it. And if it has that exclusive check, you can no longer have any conversations. Okay. Unless they go back and cancel. And I think I've included in here a cancellation form in the packet. So all of this is very good information. I highly, highly, highly suggest that you all read it and you all understand it. Management approval. If an associate license in a broker's office enters into this agreement on the broker's behalf, broker or manager has the right to cancel this agreement in writing within 5 days after its execution.
Where are you exactly?
I'm on page 3, I think. Oh, it's 4, it's at 11.
I have a question. So do we, for these buyer's broker agreement, once we sign it, we have to send it just like the listing agreement for manager broker signature?
I don't think there's a place for Chris to sign, but let me double check that. Hold on. No, it's just the agent.
Okay.
It's just like any other normal contract.
Okay.
But if after it's reviewed and for any reason
Oh, I
that
see.
there's found, like say you're working with someone and you find that they're not being truthful or you don't care for the way they're doing business and you just don't want to be involved because you don't know it could put you in a legal risk, you have the right to cancel after 5 days, before 5 days is up. Okay. So within those 5 days, you can cancel this for any reason.
All right.
Yes.
So a good example will be, some people, they just forget that they have an exclusive buyer broker agreement with another agent.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you find that will be one thing that you don't want to get in the middle of that, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And that means, client never canceled one.
Mhm.
That means that you can just cancel it. You don't have to go through your broker or anything. You can do it for whatever reason.
Yeah. So it can be canceled. Okay. So disputes, we all know that we want to go to mediation, arbitration. We don't want to involve lawyers. We don't want to do any of that stuff as much as we can. Most of the time you will be represented by a lawyer by the office in case it ever gets that far. This is where the buyer on page 5, where the buyer will, initial that it is exclusive and that box is checked on the front. Okay. So, and it explains to them what that means, that they are held responsible to this agreement, period. That if they sign another agreement with somebody else, they're going to be in some big old trouble. and then they initial it. Okay. One of the things I had this conversation with a mortgage loan officer, and a lot of times we just send everything over DocuSign and people just check. We got to make sure that we're having conversations with our clients, because they're going to come back and say, I didn't know that. You signed it. They can still fight us. They can still fight us. And in the state of California,
They will win.
they will win. They will win. So just go through all of these things with them. If they have any questions, you address it, and then you send it via DocuSign. I would just have them sign everything right there. I would literally go through all of these documents. I would not send it DocuSign. This is one of those ones where it's going to come back to bite you in the butt as the agent if it's not right. Because you could do all of the work and end up not being able to get paid. It's that serious. Okay.
So you would suggest printing this out
I would.
every time.
I suggest you put this in your buyer's presentation, that this is a part of that. This and the advisory, that is a part of your buyer's presentation. And that one of the things that we're going to strongly suggest is that, well, we're going to have to, because you're not going to be able to show houses without some sort of agreement. So if you don't do a buyer broker agreement before you go to show a house, there is a 1-pager. I did include it in the packet. We can touch on it if we have some time, that you can do just for the properties that you're showing. Okay.
I have one
So,
question.
yes.
Sorry, interrupt.
No, you're good.
You mentioned something about printing and having it ready. How are we managing open houses? Since, you know, the meaning of having an open houses is that we do get people to view the property.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, there's
So-
a form.
I'm going to go over that form too.
Okay,
So for open houses, if you're the listing agent, there's a form for you to, that point, you're representing the seller, right? As the
Mhm,
listing
mhm.
agent. So there's a form. I'm going to go over that shortly. Let's get through this one here. So
Okay.
here's just a confirmation of compensation. So they're going to make you go over it twice with your client. Buyer confirms that the compensation specified in the paragraph above for broker's services is, and you're going to check that box, 2.5%. They make sure that they understand that that's what's happening. Okay.
Mhm.
Unless there's another flat rate, like say you're going out to show them a new home build and it's, you know, how they do a flat $10,000. You can put that in there too, but you're not going to get paid even on a new home build without this. Okay. So this has to be done on every transaction.
Just to be clear,
Mhm.
sorry to interrupt.
Nope, you're good.
Any numbers we are talking about, like 2.5% or $10,000,
The suggestion.
those are just suggestions. They're just based on common standard, but not dictated standards.
Yes.
So you do what you want to do.
Mhm.
If you go too low, they'll check with me or
Yeah.
Eli,
Yeah.
you know, or Chris.
That won't happen.
Well, if it's going down to a 2%, I don't think anyone's going to stop you guys from doing it for 2%. We're not going to stop the deal. I don't think anybody's going to stop the deal, right? I mean, on the buy side, even if you did it for 1%, but we're going to have that conversation with you to encourage you to be able to know your worth and know your value and be able to communicate that value with your clients so that they don't try and take away your hard-earned money. So
But if we're at this point and they're insisting on 1 or 1.5%,
you can walk away.
I can walk away.
You sure can.
Yeah.
And that's the way, I mean, honestly, I think a lot of agents get hurt and become known as a discount agent because they don't understand their value and they can't project their value. They can't explain it to somebody about what they do and how they do it in order for them to be seen as an expert. And that's the reason why they don't get compensated or they get somebody to work them down. Okay. All right. So we pretty much have come to the end of the buyer's broker compensation agreement. Are there any questions before we move on to a different form?
No.
It looks fun.
It does, but you know what?
Once you start going through it, I'm sure after once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
And this also covers mobile homes too.
Yes, it covers everything, commercial even. It even covers commercial. And that if you look at the very first page in that box where it says what type of property, it tells you. A commercial is in there as well. So, all right. Let's move on because I want to touch on the purchase agreement. Give me 1 second. I can't get to the thing. There you go. All right. So the residential purchase agreement, you
Leslie,
now
we
will
have a-
need,
I'm
Uh-huh.
sorry, we have a question. It says here in the chat, do we
that's
have
what I was
to,
trying to
li-
get you to.
do we
Mhm.
have to list the individual properties?
Not on the buyer broker. But let's talk about, let me see, which one is that? So I can grab it real fast. There is one, if you don't do a buyer broker to just work with your clients, it's called the buyer identification of preferences or no, that's not it. Sorry. No, that is it. Which one is it? Maybe I didn't print it out.
Yeah.
Did I not print it out?
I haven't seen it.
Hold on. I think I have it in this packet. Okay, so here's the agreement.
That's one that's a buyer
That's
representation broker compensation that you're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with now is the one that has the different properties listed. Or no, I'm sorry.
No, there's a different one. Okay. There is another form, and I don't know if no, this is it. This is it. No, that's not it. No, that's not it.
We've already been seeing this.
What's over there? That goes with the RPA.
Yeah.
You're stacking it over there. I saw it earlier. So there is a form. I just don't necessarily have it in front of me at the moment. Yeah. So on the buyer broker, it gives you a date. And I think it says all properties, basically. Counties and cities. So it doesn't give you a specific option to choose a property, but there is a form.
I think it's the open house one, that's what that you're
It's-
looking for.
So there's two open house ones. There is not that one. Give me 1 second. I saw it because I pulled it out. Not that one. We are going to talk about that one. Property showing agreement. This one. It is not in there. It is called the property showing and representation agreement. And this one you can list out addresses. Okay. It has, it gives you the dates and how many, how long you're going to be doing it. But the thing is that, and I had this happen with one of our agents that is no longer with us in this office, where someone had a buyer broker agreement, and on that buyer broker agreement, it had the address. So this situation right here, where the agent said, I'm showing this property specifically, I'm taking you, I'm writing the offer, I represent you on this property, and it upheld in arbitration, even though their offer did not get accepted. So the offer did not get accepted by the one buyer's agent. Somebody else wrote the contract. But because they had an exclusive agreement with the property address specified, get out the English, we were held responsible to pay the compensation to that agent. So you are covered. So make sure that anything that you do go out and show, you're keeping track of everything. So that if you guys decide that you're not going to work together, you are covered if they sign this. Because it states on here that you've shown them these properties. I've taken you on tour, we've gone over these properties, and I want to be compensated for that. So if you end up buying these, even if it's a non-exclusive, right? It's the right to represent, that they will owe you for that if they sign this agreement.
And if I'm correct,
Mhm.
there's an initial place on each line.
Yep.
Okay, each address.
No, there is no initial on each address, but on each page.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably have them initial on each
I would too, just to cover yourself.
Yeah.
You guys got that?
Would you?
Yeah, go ahead,
would you
Kathy.
recommend if you do have the buyer representation broker compensation agreement
Mhm.
and that signed, to still use the list all the properties that you showed?
You could.
Just to double check.
Mhm.
And how do we catch that if that happens? How does this caught?
You'd be lucky.
Yeah. Go through the MLS. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's one of those houses held in the MO.
Word or something.
Yeah.
Must have been on their toes with that.
Yeah.
Or suspected something.
Mhm.
And so also you can use that showing paper in lieu of this. Of the buyer's representation. You don't have to have that, but you can use that. You can show them properties. They just have to sign that.
No, I think you have to have both.
You always have.
I think you have to. We don't have to always, because you could sign this where it says basically any property that I show you.
Or just search. properties.
Exactly. So, or certain properties, right? Like they say I did a non-exclusive, and you showed me 3 properties and that agent over there showed me 3 properties. I'm going to go with one of the ones that you showed me And so it's on your list. So you're covering yourself. I personally would just keep a list of everything that I'm showing. You know, yeah, exactly. So any questions in regards to this form here?
I have a question, Leslie. Isn't it better to just write like the county, where if we're showing multiple homes in the county, in a certain county, just to write the county where we're showing the properties?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that is
Except
listed.
for on that form, where it
And-
has specific addresses.
Yeah.
That you show.
Yeah.
Not that you're.
I think that other form basically is going to be if there is a non-exclusive. I mean, that would be the best option, right? If somebody's doing a non-exclusive buyer broker agreement, if some reason your client decided I want to be able to use my brother too. So then you sign this as a non-exclusive buyer broker agreement to where that box is not checked. And then at that point, you make sure that every property listed is on that other document. And
I
then you
do-
signed it.
I have a question, and I
Yes.
think this applies for the one form that you showed us before, which is only up to 3 properties.
Yeah.
How many times do we have people from the Bay Area, they want us to show that particular property, like right when we're already closed the open house? And they insisted, and they said that they don't have a buyer broker agreement or they don't have an agent. I think that's when they're very reluctant to sign something, but that would be a good thing to, I think
Yeah.
it's just like caught my attention.
Well, I think that what's going to happen is that everybody's going to be pushing that they have to sign something, that there's going to be no more of that,
Mhm.
no more playing it back and forth. Go ahead, Linda.
I was just gonna say, I know that there are a lot of agents that are not going through what we're going through here at KW. So there's probably gonna be a lot of agents that will let people slip and slide. However, just talking with car attorneys and others that are teaching this, they're saying if you're at an open house and someone refuses to sign in, normally what we would do is say, okay, hand them the flyer and still answer their questions. But in the new world, if you will, you can't do that. You can just hand them the flyer and let them go if they have questions, because anything that you say moving forward after August 17th, if you answer their questions, it's like you're representing them. And if you don't have an agreement with them, you put yourself at risk. So we have to get used to saying, please sign in, however you're going to word it. And you can't give them any more information than what's on the flyers.
Yes,
If they don't
exactly.
sign it.
So this is the open house non-agency disclosure.
And you got to remember from school, they say before anybody signs anything, the first thing that has to be signed is the agency disclosure. The only form, the open house form, is the only one that does not have to have the agency disclosure signed, because it's an open house visitor non-agency disclosure and sign it. So everything else has to have that. I think it's 2-page agency disclosure laying out the 2800.1 through 3, I think it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, just make sure you have that also filled in the top of your paperwork.
Yeah.
They sign that. Now I've met people at a house, and I give them the packet, and I say that door does not open without these being signed, so you can make a decision right now. And then we go through the forms, and most people don't care. They're like, okay, that's what it takes to get the door open. Fine.
Yep.
You know.
I agree. So this one right here, this is the open house visitor non-agency disclosure that Brian was just talking about and what Miss Linda was talking about. It shows you here that even if it's a virtual tour, you still got to have them sign something. So being a virtual tour, DocuSign or whatever. But down here, it explains to them why they're signing it. That's the biggest thing, is that explains to them, and you can give them the cliff notes as they're standing there, but it's stating that I do not represent you. I'm not your agent. I represent the seller at this point. Then you communicate. That any communication that we have, it's not confidential. So if you say something in regards to what you're looking for, and I repeat it back to the seller, it's not confidential information because I don't represent you. If you don't have an agent, number 3, any conversation that's the not confidential. But if a visitor comes in and at that time discloses that they're working with another agent, then they're just a visitor. They just sign and move on. But if somebody wants you to represent them, that's when you pull out the BRBC and you have them sign it if they don't have an agent. Okay. It's also saying that you can do the property showing and representation agreement. I think that's the one that we just talked about. So you can use that at the open house so that you represent them. So if they want to write an offer, they're saying that you're my agent for this property. Okay, so that one that we just went over about the listing of the 3 properties, you can use that. So when you do an open house, have the BRBC with you as well as that, the PSRA. Yeah, the one that we just went over,
And you need the agency disclosure.
and the agencies as well. Thought I saw that somewhere on here where you needed to have that.
There's another thing I wanted to point out on the listing agreement.
Mhm.
The period can only be up to 2 years for residents.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's A1 or 2A1.
What was it before?
Not it was, well, here's the problem. There were companies that were giving someone $5,000 to have an exclusive listing of their property for the next 40 years. Okay, so they would
40 years?
40 years. So and they would put a lien on the property for that. So they can't sell the property without paying 3% to the seller or to the selling agent. And so it was really screwing things up.
So they changed it to where it can
So
only be
they
2 years
made it
long.
so that it'll only be 24 months. That's
Hmm.
why that's there.
Okay.
Because there were a lot of people just getting all screwed up by that. They're like, it's free $5,000. But when you're talking about maybe 40 years down the line, that $500,000 house is worth 2.5 million.
Yeah.
And they're getting 3%,
Yeah.
which is not the standard in California.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of goofy,
Wow.
because at the time it meant nothing to them. And I think they were even going with a higher percentage.
Wow.
And then they file it with the county clerk's office too. So it's always there. So if someone else sells your house for you because you forgot about it,
Mhm.
those people will get the 3 to 5% no matter what.
That's crazy.
It's yeah.
Wow.
Good stuff.
All right. So let's move on to go ahead. Sorry. Ed.
No, theoretical. Person comes in, they sign this.
Mhm.
They look at the house, say, I want you to represent.
Mhm.
Do I whip this out now and start dealing with it?
Yep.
As far as everybody else, or can I say, I'm closing up in an hour, let's meet at Starbucks?
You can totally do that. But what I would do would be maybe give them the advisory
Uh-huh.
and read it. Here,
Okay.
go ahead and read this. This is the advisory.
Yeah.
This explains how buyer brokers are now paid for their compensation. Please read this. And then as soon as you're done reading that, we'll go over it and I'll have you sign the buyer broker agreement. So did you guys hear that part?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So on the purchase agreement itself, your buyer broker or your compensation is now a part of the purchase agreement. Okay. So where did it go? I lost it. It is a form that has to be included now here. So I think it's actually been included. The SPBB. It is the seller's payment to buyer's broker. That is now listed as a form on section G3, paragraph 18. We're now on the purchase agreement. It's in one of these packets, I think. That one right there. So it's page 2 of the purchase agreement. It is right here it's literally at the top of page 2 of 17. Okay. So once that is checked, then you include this form here. And it is this form here. That box. And so that will then add your compensation to the offer. Okay.
That's really good.
Mm-hmm. And so you can see down here that they can accept it or not. And it'll probably be a part of the addendum at that point.
I'm assuming if you check it, it'll pop up.
Yes. Yes. If you check that, it should become one of the car forms that you fill out. So
I would suggest additionally to when you summarize the offer in your email to the
Mhm.
listing agent, to go ahead and put that.
Yeah.
That was checked and the percentage that the buyer is obligated to.
Yeah.
The buyer's agent.
Mhm.
So somebody doesn't think, oh, you're trying to trick me.
Yeah.
So it's just a courtesy.
Mhm.
Some people will think, some people will miss that completely.
Yes.
And you don't want to get into a
And
contract.
then you
that's
try to
not-
close and the buyer doesn't have the money.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So did you guys hear Brian about how that box right there on the RPA, super easy to miss?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah.
That line, that box right there is very easy to miss. But if it's not checked, you could miss out on being compensated. Okay. So you want to make sure that you go over every single box that's on this. Okay. And Brian said that if there's to summarize it inside your email to the seller's agent. Okay. And this is separate from any credit backs that you guys are asking for.
That's the,
Yeah. Yes. The usual areas. Any questions in regards to that?
No.
If you have a conversation with the listing agent and the seller is cooperating as far as saying, yeah, I'll pay whatever the buyer agent is, but they have not agreed on an amount and or percentage, when you submit your offer, you put in your percentage and or amount, or do you ask them what the seller is comfortable with? I'm just thinking there's always going to be someone that's going to say, do your highest and best offer, right? And now since that highest and best offer includes your compensation, is that how you would handle that? Or how would you handle that if they don't give you a specific amount?
Then you go back to your buyer and you let them know. And if they say, I can't afford that extra 0.5%, then you got to go back and you got to redo your buyer broker agreement.
No, what I'm saying is, say, you have a buyer that wants to see a location, right? 123 Main Street, and you call up Joe Blow that's listing 123 Main Street and say, hey, I have a buyer that wants to view this property, and you ask them all the things. And so now we're going to be, has your seller agreed to any buyer compensation or whatever? Because they should have had that conversation with them. And they say, yeah, they're willing to pay, but they didn't say how much, or they didn't give a percentage. And so I know what I told my buyer. So when I present my offer to them, if they want to purchase that, I'm going to say, okay, well, my 2.5 or my 3 or whatever it was I told them, right? Is that what you do, or do you try to get them to give you a specific amount? I guess that's my question.
My suggestion at that point, because I don't even know if you're going to be able to have those conversations anymore with the way that these things are being changed. It might be, are the sellers offering concessions to the buyer? Not the agent, concessions to the buyer. Elias, I see your message too, in regards to the broker compensation. It's one of those things where you don't want to get caught by saying something that we're not supposed to anymore. Asking a seller to compensate the buyer's agent is what we're trying to get away from, because it's not. That's the part where they're saying is that red line, right? So it's now stating, are they offering any concessions to the buyer? Because ultimately it's the buyer's responsibility to pay that commission. So that concession to the buyer would be the 2.5% of the sales price, and that will be used to pay the commission for the buyer.
But when you're in negotiations with the listing agent, you can tell them, this is what the buyer has agreed to pay me. I'm going to mark this, the seller agrees to pay that. And that's another point of negotiation that they can counter. So they can counter that and say, after they look at their net sheet, it doesn't work for them. And they could say, we're only willing to pay the buyer to whatever it is with the buyer, 1.5%. So then that's a conversation between you and your buyer. Are you willing to take 1.5% to represent them? Or like I've told a buyer, they're only offering 1.5%. I do work at 2.5%. You're going to have to come up with that other 1%. And then they'll usually ask, well, how much is it? Okay, if it's accepted at the purchase price that we offered, it's this much more money. And then you should already know by then if they even have that available to them. And just say it like it's a matter of fact. It's $3,500 more that you're going to have to come out of pocket. And then you have that discussion whether to accept that contract or not. It's ultimately their decision. If you want to say, I'll take the 1.5 for just to have this client for future business, that's your business. You just do it. But if you want to stand your ground on that, then you have that conversation with them. So yeah, it's all negotiable back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I think that this may stop is those, I want $5,000 credit back. That's what a lot of this is going to change, those conversations, because now they're responsible to pay the compensation up front. Like, they're responsible before you even get to the table to understand that they're responsible for that compensation. So then later on, it may come down to, okay, let's negotiate. I only can pay you 2%, but it's coming from the seller, right? So it's going to stop, I think, a lot of those clients that I want part of your commission, because they think it's free, right? They think that money's free coming from the seller.
Right.
So Yeah, Kathy.
Question on, can listing agents, let's say you get an offer
Mhm.
and that you see that the buyer has agreed to pay their agent. Can the listing agent, like we ask for proof of funds, for
Mhm.
down payments, can we ask for proof of funds? Is that okay to ask for proof of funds that the buyer can actually pay? So we need to close.
Yeah, that
I
is
think that's-
part
oh, yeah.
of the,
If you could put that like in the MLS, not proof of
Yeah.
funds. that
Is
buyers
that on
can
the
please
RPA?
give Their proof of funds that they can pay, that they can close. 'Cause
Get to the RPA. Hold on.
that's gonna be an issue.
I
Verification of
believe
down
that,
payment and closing costs. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
but on
believe
top of
that
that-
when they show proof of funds, they have to, if they are agreeing to pay yours without you negotiating it from the seller, I believe that the proof of funds would be shown at the time if they're getting financing or paying cash, they would have shown you that they have the ability to pay your commission also.
It should be a part of that.
That's in one of these forms. Let's see.
One of the things,
Funds can also be, proof of funds can also be, an approval from a lender.
yes,
Now, but that doesn't necessarily mean the approval from the lender is gonna include what the buyer's gonna pay their agent.
so down here in section G of the buyer broker compensation agreement, it says other financial considerations. You can check the box, buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay broker. And then, or also buyer intends to purchase with the following loan products, which does not allow buyer to pay compensation to broker. So the only thing I think you can see, the only thing I see on here is on that buyer broker agreement saying that they can't pay it, that they don't have the ability to pay it.
Right.
So that's a part of that to where you can include that in, where's the other form I got? This one? Is it on here as well? Present the dates. Sorry, I'm reading, guys. So in number 3 of the seller's payment, so the SPBB that goes along with your offer, line 3 says buyer authorizes buyer's broker and the escrow holder upon request to deliver to the seller or the seller's broker a copy of the portion of the buyer representation agreement identifying the compensation the buyer has agreed to pay, such as the last page of the BRBC. So they will be able to see it if they ask for it, where it shows whether or not they can pay it or not.
Okay.
So they will be able to see it.
That makes sense to me,
Yeah.
because again, like I said, I receive proof of funds all the time on listings,
Mhm.
or lenders.
Yeah.
And they can't include
Yeah.
anymore, so you have to have it separate.
Some of them now are though.
Some
I
of
think
them-
that they're changing it. I think that, and I have to correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys have heard any different, that there are some lenders now that are giving it to where it can be rolled into the fund, to the loan. If it has
Yeah.
to be, if it has to be, if it has to be.
Right.
I know that Sallie Mae and Freddie Mac, they rolled that back. And I think that even the VA has done something along those lines. Conventional, I think that's an option. It's always been an option, I think, with conventional.
So I'm always kind of thinking of I like details, I like
Yeah.
exactly what's happening, so it's
Mhm.
filled out, so I don't have mistakes made.
Yes.
So if they do roll it in, then, I would be able to look at what the offer is, and then if the lending is a little over and they're
Mhm.
telling me they're gonna pay for it, then I can figure that out.
Yeah.
At least as proof of funds, I've got to tell my seller that it got close.
Yeah.
And then I'll call the lender and ask them if that is true.
Yes.
Okay. gotcha.
100%.
Yeah.
It's all about communication. It's all about having those conversations. So, well, I hope that this was helpful. I know that we've been beating a dead horse with these forms, but I think it's better to beat the horse than to be dead.
I'm a
Okay.
detail person, so I'm-
So
Uh,
us going over these forms, hey, it's making me read them.
Yes.
Right.
mean-
I have one last note or question, however you want
Uh-huh.
to take it. So when we're taking the listing, we're steering away from negotiating at that time the buyer's broker compensation.
Yes.
But in the advisory, we are letting them know they expected to be a part of the offer of the
Yes.
of the negotiation.
Mhm.
All right.
Yes, that is correct.
What was the question?
It's when you negotiate with your seller, you're negotiating for your compensation, but you're going to give them the advisory and state, be ready, because they're probably going to come and ask for you to be able to compensate the buyer's agent.
Right.
That's just a line on your net sheet that you present to the seller when you get an offer.
You got it.
Yes.
That, yeah, then also too, like with
Mhm.
depending on the loan and the lenders and how they choose to do that, say they're gonna roll in the buyers, they
Yeah.
may put a maximum. So we'll have to take a look at what that is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Try to work it out.
Great.
And
Okay.
to
Well,
the,
thank you guys. Uh-huh.
no. And to the buyer's broker agreement is we're considering already them paying the buyers being, liable for that compensation, but also the advisory again says that that can be negotiated to the seller.
Yes. So that's the conversation that you're going to have with your seller is I would like, my compensation for this XYZ, what I'm going to provide you is going to be 3%. That's what I'm asking for. Here's the buyer's advisory. And I don't know what those buyer's agents are going to ask for, but you can expect it to be 2.5% in that area. It could be 2, it could be 2.25. But that might be
You know
something
what?
to consider. Mhm.
I think as a listing agent, it's probably better if we don't give them a percentage for the buyer's agent because we don't know what the buyer agent might come back and ask for. But to let them know that that is a possibility.
Mhm.
Because I think the whole lawsuit was because we were throwing out definite numbers, right? We were saying it's 6% or it's 5%, blah, 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 2.5 goes here, 2.5 goes there. And sellers just felt cornered. I know that was in Illinois. We're in
Mhm.
California. We did it a little bit different, but I think
Mhm.
the spirit of it is that we should veer away from saying any specific numbers other than what we're willing to take as the agent. Because
Well,
then
what you can do is, and this is something that Brian had mentioned, is that when you take a listing, you want to give your sellers a net sheet. So you take what
Right.
their current stuff is, right? Their current loan, and then all of these expenses. This is what we're thinking title's going to be. This is what you're possibly looking at. You could be looking at, this is just a scenario that you're looking
Right.
at for concessions for the buyer. That's how we want to change our words, right? Concessions for the buyer, not buyer broker compensation, concessions for the buyer. So when we say that, it's a completely
But-
different conversation, but it's part of the net sheet. So they already take it into consideration that this is a scenario that it could be, and then this is what you're going to walk away with. So when you do it on the net sheet like that for a seller.
Right. But
Yeah.
isn't buyer concessions inclusive of other things? So that's not necessarily commission. Because I mean, we do buyer concessions now
Mhm.
and and commission. So I don't know, is that misleading? I guess my question is that misleading them, making them think because
It-
they
it's a
hear of seller
scenario.
credits and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it's a
And
scenario. So that's where we're going to be changing a lot of that. You're not going to be able to say they need 2.5% concession in order to cover them. But then we also got to give them $10,000 to buy down their rate. You know what I'm
right,
saying? So like
right,
that's going to change those conversations. That's going to change those conversations. It's going to change those conversations with your buyer because it's going to be they're now responsible to pay that 2.5%. That's going to change their thought process on trying to nickel and dime and get more money out of the seller.
Mhm.
So it's all about conversations. It's all about educating them. You never know though. I mean, the seller could be willing to give $10,000 to help buy down a rate in order for them to get in the house and get it better. You never know.
right,
It's all part of negotiations. Everything
right.
that we do is negotiations.
And on G1 through 3,
Mhm.
um,
And this is on the purchase agreement?
yeah, G1 on the purchase agreement, seller credit, if any, to buyer. And that has, either a percentage or an amount,
Mhm.
above is for calculation purposes and not a contractual term, but seller credit to be applied to closing costs or other. And then separate from that is G3, which does specifically the buyer's,
Compensation,
compensation.
the buyer.
Yeah,
broker.
and that's what I was saying is that if we say concessions, people are going to think of what we have been saying concessions are because we've been talking concessions and then commission. So I just kind of think that if we say buyers concessions, because even the MLS says that they can't say,
Yeah.
seller is willing to do whatever. Yeah,
So in
it's like
actuality, it is.
they can't imply that there is anything going to the
Yes.
broker's agent.
So
So
when
I think
you get your final HUD from title, your
Mhm.
compensation is now going to be on the buyer side. It's not going to
Right,
be on the seller side anymore.
right,
So it is actually a concession because the buyer is the one that's responsible for it. And so that credit is going to be now on the buyer side of that HUD, showing that the seller gave that credit for that commission to be paid. So it is actually a concession. It's just that money is going to you and not to them. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does.
So I know, so one of the things I think that because this is new for us is we're used to being paid compensation. We're used to being paid our money, and that's per the listing agreement.
Mhm.
Well, now it's the buyer's responsibility. And so the seller is actually giving that concession to the buyer for that.
Okay.
So
can we-
it's going to be, there's different ways to check it on the RPA. So there's different ways to indicate it on the RPA. So there's the repair credits, there's the, the different things. So it's just outlining to the seller on the RPA what those are actually for.
Got you, got you.
So title can, right, Kathy, so title can distribute correctly. So,
So
yeah.
can
So
we,
it's just dancing around with words.
Yes.
It's, it's kind of crazy, but we've dealt with crazy before. We'll do it again.
Yes. Some of you weren't here during the COVID stuff as an agent, and man, when they shut us down, that put everybody into a frenzy, and then trying to do open houses and all of that stuff. So us being able to get through COVID, which I think was probably way more of a challenge than this is, everybody's gonna be fine. Everybody's totally gonna be fine. It's just something that's new and it's different from what we're used to.
And we
So
had to pee everywhere we went. Right?
yes,
The
the PEDs that they had to fill out, you had to have
property entry, whatever.
clean after every person that came in, and it was a lot. It was a lot during that time. So this is only just conversations. We don't necessarily need to change how we're doing things. We're still going to do the buyer representation, not the buyer presentation. There you go. There you go. So, Chris, you had a question. If you get a call on a listing from a buyer, can you give them any information?
Not more than what you
Getting a
would give
phone
on the
call,
flyer.
yes. Yeah.
That's
So
correct.
So yeah, you're right. So you can have those conversations because you're representing the seller at that point. So you can't give any extra info other than what you have on your, marketing. So is there any other questions, guys?
I do. I'm sorry to
Yes.
be repetitive. You
you're
mentioned
fine.
about the concessions,
Mhm.
and since they're going to be part of the cost to the buyer, can we call it part of the closing costs?
I
To the
believe
buyer?
that is part of what it states on the contracts. So it does state on the contracts that it is part of closing costs.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Just for the sake of the conversation when we're having those
Yeah.
conversations. All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
100%. So you're welcome. Again, I strongly encourage you all to read the documents, to go through everything, and make sure that you're familiar with it, and start doing some more scripts, right? Get with other agents and bounce stuff off.
Yeah. Nobody,
Yeah.
Speaking of
So,
script, we do Conversation Ninjas Monday through
Yes.
Friday on Zoom, so you guys can join us Mondays and Fridays. Eli is always with us. Tuesday through Thursdays, it's just the agents, but you guys are more than welcome to come and be a part of that.
it's always good to bounce the conversations off of each other, because then you can give each other scenarios, you can give each other, little screws into the conversation and make you think and expand your knowledge. So
Listen, I'm gonna take it south through
Yeah.
training, not that I'm perfect,
Yeah.
and this book's gonna be all about the challenges of
Mhm.
insurance.
Yeah.
And so I told Eli that I would write down notes for.
that would be awesome.
And I'll let him decide how he's gonna handle that.
Speaking of car, that was something that I was also, they have tons of videos for all of these new forms. And I haven't looked at
I
them
don't know,
personally.
I've been on
Oh,
it too.
connection is unstable. Sorry, connection was unstable, but I haven't been on there. Brian said they're pretty good.
Yeah.
So check them out.
When you go on, what'll come up in the upper right-hand corner after you log in, or even before you log in, is a little banner that says, here's all the new stuff. It's like about 2 inches by 2 inches, it's a banner, and you click on that thing and it'll take you in there. And then you can either sign in, because it'll make you sign in, or you will have already signed in.
Yeah.
And it'll take you into all the new forms and all the videos. And you want to go down, like the last video was the 19th.
Oh, that's awesome. Just
So
3 days ago.
yeah, and it was pretty good. So
Yeah.
it doesn't cover absolutely everything, but it covers as much as you will need. I always say this to any new agents I deal with, and I don't think they ever listen to me. Pick up this packet of contracts, and look at it as if you had just got a letter from a lawyer that says so-and-so is suing you
Mm.
because of this, and whatever it is. You're going to read every stinking line of this contract to figure out a way out of this problem that someone's suing you for.
Yeah.
So do that beforehand, and then you'll avoid a lot of lawsuits because you won't miss anything. And you can confidently talk a client through these agreements before they sign and make it a contract.